know me, I'm Deborah Stanhill. I'm chair of the Emerging Scholar Fellowship Committee. We are delighted to be learning again with our Emerging Scholar Fellow, Leora Orenshein. It's wonderful to see all of you. Some of you have been before, and new faces. I want to, if you don't know anything about our Emerging Scholar Fellowship, on this page, it's on the table, there's an explanation, and there's more information on our website. And if you missed Leora's first class, it's all available on our YouTube channel, which is also there's a link on the website. Please join me in welcoming Rosie Chechik, Leora's mentor for this class. Rosie agreed to be a mentor for this program just a few months ago, and we are so grateful that she is here this morning and to have her sharing her experience and expertise with Leora. Rosie is an award-winning educator, a former head of school for Jewish day schools, and a sought-after speaker. She is currently completing her PhD in Jewish history and is the community scholar at the Jewish Center of Manhattan, as well as a fellow at the Center for Israel Studies at YU, and many, many other things. As a mentor, Rosie has worked with Leora on class design and pedagogy for this class, and we'll be meeting with her again to discuss takeaways from Leora to use as she plans her next class on March 1st. I want to thank Talia Greenboim, our Director of Education and Engagement, for the immense amount of hard work she has put into this morning's class and the program as a whole, and wish her b'sha'at tovah. Thank you, Karen and James Wolf and Miriam Kusowski, for graciously opening your homes to Rosie and Leora. As always, thanks to the members of the Mayan board, led by President Maria Novich, who is on her way back from Israel, for your hard work and support, and to the members of the ESF committee. And thank you to Shari Tefillah for hosting us this morning. This fellowship is funded outside of Mayan's operating budget, so a special thank you to our foundational donors who ensure we create this program. Leora's bio is on this sheet, so I won't go into details. Leora, you're very
Thank you. Well, here's hope, everyone. So nice to see many familiar faces, some new faces. I'm looking forward to learning with everyone this morning. For those who were here last time we learned about the bracha of hamafil, a bracha that you say before going to sleep at night, which is a little more obscure, a little less familiar of a bracha. Today, we're going to do a bracha that's much more familiar to us, and that is the bracha of Shehecheyanu, a bracha that we said just a week and a little bit ago on the first night of Chanukah. When I think of the bracha of Shehecheyanu, the first thing that comes to my mind is my grandmother. I imagine sitting at a table kind of like this at the Pesach Seder. My grandmother and I do a lot of planning for the Seder. My grandmother has me come over and make place cards for everybody and work on who's going to sit next to who, what games are we going to have at the Seder, all of the planning that goes into it. And when we get to the Seder every year, my grandmother gets up in front of the family and she says, mostly geared towards the children, there are 2 rules at the Seder. Rule number 1, no crying at the Seder. Rule number 2, no bedtime at the Seder. And every year, year after year, we get up to the first part of the Seder, Kaddish or Chazar, right at the beginning, right at Kaddish, we all say Kiddush together, and then all together, the whole family says the bracha, Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Thank you, Hashem, for keeping us alive and well and getting us to this moment. And right off the bat, my grandmother every year breaks the first rule. She starts crying, and then my mom starts crying, and then I start crying. And I think it speaks to the nature of this bracha. It's this very emotional bracha. Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu. Hashem, thank you for keeping us. We'll see if it's a thank you, what kind of bracha exactly it is, but Hashem, you have kept us alive, you have kept us well, you have brought us to this point. My grandmother looks around the table, as we look around the table just like this, sees the generations for her family, and brings her to tears in the bracha. Just last week at candlelighting, my grandparents came over, and not in the context of the Seder, my grandfather said Shehecheyanu, and my grandmother proceeded to start crying, and my mom started crying, and I started. Every time this bracha of Shehecheyanu, it's this very emotional, it's very interesting bracha. And we're going to see today that it's a little bit of a mysterious bracha. This bracha of Shehecheyanu is a bracha that we find a lot of meaning in. It's much more meaningful than, say, the bracha of Shahakal or even the bracha of Hamapil. It's also a very strange bracha. We say it at very disparate, seemingly disjointed times during the year. We say a bracha of Shehecheyanu on reading the Megillah or shaking lulav, But we don't say bracha of Shehecheyanu at a wedding or at a bris. We say it on all sorts of different, we say it on having a new fruit, but we don't say it on all sorts of different happy occasions, when somebody gets engaged, when your kids get into college, things that seem like they're happy. So it seems a little bit disjointed. It's a little bit of a mystery. When do we say this bracha of Shehecheyanu, and what rules govern when we say Shehecheyanu? So what we're going to try to do today is, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to make a list. We're going to try to come up with all of the times in the calendar year or in life that we recite this blessing of Shehecheyanu. Then we're going to look at our list and we're going to try to parse out what are the rules that govern Shehecheyanu. What are the principles that we rely on to decide when should we say this bracha. Then we're going to see how exactly we apply those rules. We're going to see a big debate, a major debate between the Rambam and a Tosfot, and that Tosfot is going to lead us into a beautiful hashkafa, really some nice meaningful ideas that discuss our performance of mitzvot in general in life. A beautiful idea. And if we have a little time at the end, I have on the last page top 10 halachic questions about Shehecheyanu, and we can do a little Q&A about the bracha of Shehecheyanu. Interspersed, we'll have a little bit of covers of time, and it should be nice. So what we're going to start off with is a quick covers of time, where you could do it by yourself or turn to one or two people next to you, to just try to come up with, when do we say this bracha of Shehecheyanu? We're going to try to come up with all of the times that we say this blessing. So try to have a goal of about 7 or 8 times that you say Shehecheyanu. You can say it verbally, you can write down the list. And if you have time, also come up with 3 or 4 times that you would think we should say Shehecheyanu, but Shehecheyanu seems to be missing. You would expect that we say bracha Shehecheyanu at a certain time, but then we don't say it. Let's turn to the person next to you and do this for a minute or two, and then we'll gather everybody's answers together. What do we come up with? Let's start with, what are the times that we say Shehecheyanu? Raise your hand and give us one.
Evie said it's always on that something happy.
Always on something happy. Okay, we're already going to the rules of when do we say Shehecheyanu. First, let's just get all of the times that we say this blessing. A new fruit. That's probably the most familiar to us, right? On Rosh Hashanah, on the second night, we always have to go to the supermarket and find what kind of interesting looking dragon fruit or melon or unique kind of fruit we can get to say Shehecheyanu on. When else do we say it?
Holidays.
Holidays. Which holidays? We're going to see maybe a little bit of a disparity between holidays. Which ones do we say it on? We say it on the Shalosh Regalim. We say it on Sukkot. We say it on Pesach. We say it on Shavuos. Good. We say it on Chanukah. We just said it. Which night of Chanukah? Just on the first night of Chanukah, the first time that we're doing the mitzvah. What else? First night of Rosh Hashanah. We're going to talk about Rosh Hashanah. It's a very interesting case study, Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur. Good. Lulav.
Baby girl.
A baby girl. A baby boy. Do we say it on? Raise your hand. Did anyone? Had never heard of that? Saying a bracha of Shehecheyanu and having a baby. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. What else? New clothing. Let's talk about, do I say it on, I'm getting a new shirt, I'm getting a new suit, new sneakers. We say it definitely on some kinds of new clothing. We'll have to see what new clothing exactly qualifies for this bracha of Shehecheyanu. What else? Megillah Esther. We say it on Purim, on Mikra, the mitzvah Mikra Megillah. Any other ones we came up with?
Shofar.
We say it on Shofar. Good. Mitzvah Shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Any other ones?
I don't know if this is right or not, but when I went to Israel for the first time, a group of people who I was with said that we should say that.
Okay, very interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit of either doing it might be a mitzvah to visit Israel. So the Rambam mostly talks about when you do a mitzvah for this first time, you should say Shehecheyanu. The Rambam thinks when a bar mitzvah boy puts on tefillin for the first time, you should say Shehecheyanu. Ashkenazim don't necessarily hold like that. Or it could be you said the bracha of Shehecheyanu on going to Israel because of this overjoyed and excitement. We'll see, we say Shehecheyanu on times that we're very excited. When else do we say Shehecheyanu? A new house. That's the first Gemara, the first Mishnah we're actually going to see today. Buying a new house, maybe only if you built the house yourself, you can buy it. A new house. Any other times you came up with?
I don't know whether it's kosher or not,
Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu l'zman hazeh, to this glass of orange juice. Now, what are the times that we don't say Shehecheyanu? That you would expect we should say Shehecheyanu, but it feels glaringly missing. At a chuppah, at a wedding, we don't say Shehecheyanu. I was actually in Israel last year, and I went to the wedding of one of my Israeli cousins. It's my second cousins. They live in the Golan, and there's the mother and father, and they have 4 sons. And over the course of last year, the mother was by herself in their house in the Golan for months. The husband was a big commander in Gaza. One of the other sons was in other countries. Other son was in Gaza. They would sometimes send us selfies in the tunnels. Look who I found in the tunnels. All of her sons were fighting, and she came to the wedding. One of her sons got engaged on Chol Hamoed Sukkot, right before October 7th. He then was in Gaza for months, came back. They were not sure if all of the brothers were going to be at the wedding, if they would got out of the army. They all got out of the army. They all made it to the wedding. And my aunt stood up there with the chuppah and said, I know we don't usually say Shehecheyanu at weddings, but Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu l'zman hazeh. Not a dry eye in the room. It was a very moving moment. But usually at weddings, we don't say Shehecheyanu. When else do we not say Shehecheyanu when you would think we might say Shehecheyanu? At a bris milah, you don't say Shehecheyanu. Usually. We'll see, has anyone been to a bris in Israel? The minhag in Eretz Yisrael is some Israelis do say Shehecheyanu on a bris. We're going to have to talk about that a little bit. What else?
When a child reaches command.
When a child becomes a bar mitzvah, you would think that is a big stage in life, a new step, that is a moment. But we don't say Shehecheyanu. We have a big party and celebration, but there's no formal bracha of Shehecheyanu. However, we do have a different bracha when a boy becomes a bar mitzvah, that a father says, Baruch Shepatrani. Maybe that's and I am no longer responsible for the sins of my son. He's on his own now. He's a bar mitzvah.
That's a different vibe.
a little bit different of a kind of bracha.
We don't say it, we start
When we start something new,
we have a finishing from.
right? We say the hadras when we finish a masecha, but we don't exactly have something to kind of kick us off, to start it off. So we see there are lots of times in Judaism that we say Shehecheyanu, but there are also many times that we don't say Shehecheyanu. So the first thing I want to do together is just see it in the sources. Let's see a few Gemaras, 5 or 6 Gemaras, that just outline for us all of the halacha that we just said. What are the times that we say Shehecheyanu? Let's see the Gemaras inside together. So let's start with source number 1. This is the Mishnah. This is the most foundational Mishnah in this topic of Shehecheyanu. The Mishnah in Masechet Brachot on Daf Nun Daled Amud Aleph. The Mishnah in Masechet Brachot says, we'll start at the words Al Besoros Raos, a little bit into the first line. The Mishnah says, Al Besoros Raos, upon receiving bad news, Omer, a person should say, Baruch Dayan Ha'emes. A bracha that's on the other side of the coin that we are familiar with, that we say when someone passes away, when we hear bad news, we say a bracha of Dayan Ha'emes, that Hashem is the ultimate judge, acknowledging that Hashem also is in charge of and dictates sad things that happen in the world. But then the Gemara, on the flip side, or the Mishnah here it is, tells us the happy side of the coin. Bana bayis chadash, which is one of the examples we saw. Someone built a new house. The kona kelim chadashim, or if you acquire, you buy new kelim. It's unclear a little bit exactly what kelim here means in the Gemara. The pshat, the most simple reading of the Mishnah, is that kelim means new clothing, but kelim also means vessels, so it may also extend to buying vessels or items, other kinds of either household or enjoyable items. We'll have to see how far we expand that. But whether either if you built a new house, or you buy kelim chadashim, whether that means clothing or also other kinds of vessels or utensils, the Mishnah tells us, Omer, Baruch, Shehecheyanu, v'kiyamanu, v'higiyanu, l'zman hazeh. We should thank Hashem for bringing us to this joyous time, this momentous occasion that we could buy a house or that we could buy all sorts of new things. And the Mishnah does something a little bit interesting in the last line. Usually what a Mishnah is doing is bringing us the straight halacha telling us the way that we should act, what the rule is. But the Mishnah here inserts kind of a little bit of hashkafa, a little bit of something meaningful, a little bit of a world insight. The Mishnah just has a little tidbit here. Mevarech ala ra'a, me'in ala tova me'in ala ra'a. We should bless Hashem for the bad just as we bless Hashem for the good, and we should bless Hashem for the good just as we bless Hashem for the bad. The Mishnah kind of inserting, its own little aside saying, Hashem is in charge of the whole world. Hashem dictates both good and bad in our lives. And just as when someone passes away, we say a bracha, we also say a bracha when we buy a new house, kind of integrating God into our day-to-day, whether it's good or bad. It's a little interesting that the Mishnah adds that one. So that's the first time we say Shehecheyanu. The Mishnah tells us we build a new house or when you buy new clothing or vessels. Another time that we say Shehecheyanu, the Gemara Masechet Eruvin says, this is perhaps one of the most familiar times we say Shehecheyanu. The Gemara Masechet Eruvin, Daf Mem Bet, says, Ki atay be Rav Yehuda. Amar, Rav Yehuda said when they came to his house, Ana akara chanata nami amina zman. Also, when I saw a new squash, I also said this bracha Shehecheyanu v'kima. When I see a new fruit, or a vegetable, we can get into what exactly it would be considered, you say this bracha of Shehecheyanu, which is what we do on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, right? We say the bracha of Shehecheyanu upon having a new fruit. Notice that the Gemara doesn't say we are omer the bracha of Shehecheyanu. The Gemara says, Nami amrinan zman. Zman is time. Zman is kind of the Gemara's shorthand for Shehecheyanu. Instead of saying each time, you should recite Shehecheyanu v'kimanu v'higiyanu l'zman hazeh. In shorthand, the Gemara just says you should say zman. We'll see that come up a few times throughout our learning. So that's the second one. We have.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Is it just seeing the fruit before you eat it at the table, or if you're growing something?
Okay. So Rashi on that Gemara says all the Gemara really says is he says on a new fruit I say Shehecheyanu. Now what does that mean on a new fruit? Rashi on that Gemara says when he saw a new fruit you say Shehecheyanu. That's not really our custom nowadays. If so, then whoever bought the new fruit for Rosh Hashanah from the supermarket should say it when they're in the supermarket, and then no one should say it when you're setting the table. You should say Shehecheyanu. No one would say Shehecheyanu actually on the second night of Rosh Hashanah. So our custom nowadays is to say it when you're actually about to eat the new fruit. But it seems to be a little bit unclear in the Gemara. So far we have a new house, we have new vessels, and new fruit.
But along this similar line of thinking, new house, you don't have to, you could buy it, you build it. What about moving into a new home?
Oh, okay. Is it when you sign the deal? Is it when you actually move your furniture in? Is it the first night that you live in the house? Maybe when you put the mezuzah on the door? When do you say Shehecheyanu? We'll get to that a little bit later on in our Q&A, perhaps. When, upon doing different things, do you say this bracha? Let's continue through the different times that we say this bracha of Shehecheyanu. The Gemara in source number 3, Masechet Sukkah, on Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph. While we're reading this source, try to notice what's different about our practice nowadays than what this Gemara is saying. The Gemara says, Ha'oseh lulav la'atzmo, when you make a lulav for yourself, meaning when you tie together your arba minim, Omer, Baruch Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu l'zman hazeh. You should say this bracha of Shehecheyanu. And ha'oseh sukkah la'atzmo, and when you make a sukkah, when you put up your sukkah and you build your sukkah, Omer, Baruch Shehecheyanu v'hula. You should say also the bracha of Shehecheyanu. What's different about what this Gemara says and what our actual practice is nowadays?
It's actually not the newness of it because you're using your sukkah years ago. It's some different value to the item.
Yes, and it seems like it's not only when nowadays, when do you say the bracha on a lulav? It's when you're shaking the lulav, not when you ever have yantif, when you put your lulav together, not when you build your sukkah. Not all of us even are the ones to build the sukkah. Sometimes another family member builds it. Sometimes you hire people to build a sukkah. So if that were the case that we say it upon building it, we would never recite Shehecheyanu on the mitzvah of sukkah. So this Gemara says when you build your sukkah and when you put your lulav together. Nowadays, let's say the equivalent is, our custom nowadays is to say it upon sitting in the sukkah and shaking the lulav. So continuing on our list, this is the first time we're seeing kind of saying Shehecheyanu on a mitzvah. Before we saw Shehecheyanu on new fruits and a new house and things that we buy. Now we're seeing another theme of saying Shehecheyanu upon doing or maybe preparing to do a mitzvah. let's continue on. The Gemara in Masechet Shabbos, in source number 4, teaches us about Chanukah. I just played with my high schoolers a little Kahoot trivia game about Chanukah last week, and I tried to make the trivia questions a little bit less classic of the standard Chanukah trivia questions that they always get, like, how many candles do you light over the course of Chanukah? 44. I don't even know how to count it, but I know that the answer is 44 from all the trivia that we do in school. And so I tried to make a little bit different questions. So one of the questions I asked my students in the Kahoot game is, what Masechet of Gemara does Chanukah come up in? And my options were Shabbos, Chagiga, Rosh Hashanah, and Chanukah. I won't reveal how many of them chose Chanukah, even though that is not a Masechet of Gemara actually, but it comes up in Masechet Shabbos. Why does it come up in Masechet Shabbos? Because we're talking about, the Gemara is talking about what kind of oil and wicks you can use to light Shabbos candles. And once we're talking about Shabbos candles, the Gemara says, okay, let's also explain what kind of wicks and candles you can use for Chanukah candles, and then it expands all about the mitzvah and the holiday of Chanukah. So here the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos, on Daf Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph, tells us, Amar Rav Yehuda, Yom Rishon haroeh mevarich shtayim umadlik mevarich shalosh. Rav Yehuda says, someone who sees a menorah lit but doesn't light the menorah himself recites 2 brachot. The madlik mevarich shalosh. This is what our custom, our practice is nowadays. One who lights the menorah should say 3 brachot. And what are those brachot? The Gemara goes on a little aside of a halacha in order to get there. Mikan ve'elach, madlik mevarich shtayim, beroa mevarich achat, mema'it zman. The first night, the person who lights candles should say 3 brachot. All the nights after that, the person lighting candles should say 2 brachot. And the Gemara says, mema'it. Which bracha do we diminish? Which bracha do we get rid of after the first night? Mema'it zman. And what is zman? Zman is our shorthand for Shehecheyanu. And that's what we see that you should say the bracha of Shehecheyanu on the first night of lighting Chanukah candles. And what's notable about this Gemara about Chanukah is we before saw you say Shehecheyanu on the mitzvot of lulav and on sukkah. Those are mitzvot midoraisa. Those are mitzvot from the Torah. So it makes sense you say Shehecheyanu. Now Chanukah is saying a step further. Even on mitzvot midorabanan, even on mitzvot that are only of rabbinic origin, also you say this bracha of Shehecheyanu. Now we're going to see one more place of rabbinic origin where you say this bracha of Shehecheyanu in source number 5. The Gemara in Masechet Megillah tells us on Daf Kaf Hey Amud Bet, Lefaneha my mevarich. What bracha do you say before laning the Megillah, before laning Megillah Esther on Purim? And Rav Sheshet tells us, Barich Manach. You should say Manach. The Gemara gives us a little acronym, Mem Nun Chet. Now, what does Manach stand for? Rashi tells us. Rashi says Manach. The Mem stands for Al Mikra Megillah, the bracha we say upon actual reading of the Megillah. The Nun stands for Sha'asa Nisim. Sha'asa Nisim doesn't start with the Nun, but Nisim starts with the Nun. Miracle starts with the Nun, so that's good enough for the Gemara. And Chet is Shehecheyanu. Now, Shehecheyanu also doesn't start with a Chet, but I guess there's a Chet somewhere in Shehecheyanu. My husband's English name, his name is Zach. And so people often think that his Hebrew name is Zachariah, but actually his Hebrew name is Eliezer. And if you ask my mother-in-law why she chose the name Zach Eliezer, she said, well, there's a Z in Eliezer, so also, so there's not exactly a chet in Shehecheyanu doesn't start with it, but the Gemara says that's good enough for our acronym. Manach means we say the bracha of Shehecheyanu upon reading the Megillah. So yet another place of rabbinic origin where we see this bracha of Shehecheyanu being recited. And now, this is not an exhaustive list that we're seeing now. There are more times we say Shehecheyanu, but we'll bring just one final place we see Shehecheyanu to close off our introductory list of the times we say it. And this one is unique. This one is much lesser known, lesser heard of, perhaps not practiced nowadays, except for in certain contexts. The Gemara in Masechet Brachot, on Daf Nun Chet Amud Bet, reads Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi tells us, Haroa es chaveiro la'achar shloshim yom. One who sees his friend after 30 days, Omer, Baruch Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'yanu lazman hazeh. When you reunite with that Yedid Nefesh, a close friend of yours, after not having seen them for 30 days, you should embrace them and say a bracha of Shehecheyanu upon seeing them. Now, there are multiple reasons why people might not do this nowadays. One reason is probably that we're in contact with people. You WhatsApp them, you call them, you know how they're doing. Another one is the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, the halachic codifiers tell us that you should only say this bracha upon someone who you are sameach me'od, v'nehene me'od mirayaso, someone who you really love. And we don't want to really offend people by choosing whether we say Shehecheyanu. Not one person goes in for the Shehecheyanu, another person didn't think they were going to say the Shehecheyanu. So that's perhaps, there are a number of reasons why perhaps we don't say this bracha nowadays. There is, though, one really meaningful time that the Muslims say we should say it nowadays. I recently was watching an interview that they did with a bunch of the Talmidim of Yeshiva Har Tzion of Gush in Israel, and they were being interviewed, having a conversation about these religious Hesder soldiers, about how their Judaism kind of interplays with their time in war and their time fighting in Gaza and fighting in Lebanon. And one of the very moving pieces that they said is that when they arrived back to Yeshiva, when they walked back in the doors from Gush after months of being away fighting, their Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe Tarragon, saw them. Rabbi Tarragon, his son, our learning should be for his son. His son was badly wounded and is recovering now. And when he saw his Talmidim walk back in the door of the yeshiva, he put out his arms and he said, that he sees them, they're back, they're shalom, they're well, they're okay. So although we don't generally say it nowadays, there are certain times when really it's a tremendous simcha to see them, when really it feels like there's a reason to recite this bracha, that we say Shehecheyanu at this time. Question?
Does that also apply if your children haven't seen that for a long time?
It might. A context that I was thinking where it might come up when nowadays there's so much technology, we talk to people, we WhatsApp them, but one time that still has that bliss of not having devices is in camp. You know, let's say your kids go to camp and Boston is a little bit far to drive for visiting day, so you don't go on visiting day, you don't see your kids, and they only can write you letters. Does letters count as talking to them? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe when your kid comes back from sleepaway camp, you say, Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'ganu l'zman hazeh, and it should apply to all people. When it says your friend, it probably just means another person. It doesn't necessarily have to mean a friend and specifically not a relative. So now we saw a bunch of times that we say Shehecheyanu. We saw holidays that we say Shehecheyanu on, specific mitzvot we say Shehecheyanu on. We say it on Chanukah candles, we say it in Megillah. We say it on lulav, and we say it on Sukkah. We say it on maybe seeing a friend, a new fruit, a house, new clothing, new vessels. Our question now is, what is the common thread between all of these times that we say Shehecheyanu? I titled this year, Rolex, Dragonfruit, and Chanukah candles. What do they all have in common? What themes run through these brachot of Shehecheyanu? So I'll ask everyone here, what do you think? What are the themes, what are the principles that govern the recitation of Shehecheyanu? You can say a theme that comes up that you think applies to all of them, or a theme that comes up in a chunk of them, some category of them. What themes do we see in Shehecheyanu?
Newness. I think newness and special.
Newness, something that is new, something that is a special thing that didn't exist before, and we're starting fresh.
Something that brings you joy.
Something that brings a sense of simcha, something that's happiness, something that's really, it's an emotional kind of bracha. What else?
There's an element of gratitude.
Something that we feel this need to, there must be a bracha on this. We must thank God for whatever this experience is right now. Any other themes we're seeing?
Something pleasurable which follows a pause or hiatus or sadness. Not just that it's pleasurable, not just that it's joyous, but it's a quantum leap from the status quo immediately.
Okay, so not just something that is simcha, brings us pleasure, but another element of we didn't have that simcha beforehand. Something that we don't always have in our lives, and is kind of this burst, this flash of something really special that just came into our life right now. Okay. You one more?
Clue also that you mentioned also refers to as time, as, that you're acknowledging arrival at a certain point that.
Yes, you're picking up a little bit on why does the Gemara nickname Shehecheyanu by this nickname Zman, time? I could have just called it Shehecheyanu. It's not so many more letters, but perhaps the Gemara is picking up on a theme about Shehecheyanu. That Shehecheyanu is something that has to do with Zman, something that comes sometimes, something that's special that comes once in a while. So there's a source that's not on your sheet from the Rokeah, Rabbi Elazar Rokeah of Worms. He outlines two, maybe a third, but we're going to focus on two, qualifications for reciting this bracha of Shehecheyanu. And those two terms he comes out with are that Shehecheyanu is said on something that is simcha, something that is pleasurable, something that is happy, exciting, something that just is a simcha to us, something that's uplifting. That's number one. Number two, the second rule he outlines for Shehecheyanu is what we're saying here, is that he calls it something that comes mizman lizman, something that comes up once in a while. Now, there are two ways that the commentaries explain what this mizman lizman term means. Either it means something that comes up at a fixed time on the calendar, but only comes up once in a while, like something that comes up only once a year, reading the Megillah, Chanukah candles, something that comes up on the calendar, mizman lizman, once in a while, but that it's a fixed time. Some expand this category of mizman lizman to also be something that comes up just once in a while. You only buy a new house once in a while. You only do a pidyon haben, we'll see, once in a while. Things that only come up once in a blue moon. Not so often, but come up sometimes. The question that we're going to have now is that we have these two rules for Shehecheyanu. Simcha, happiness, and mizman lizman, comes up once in a while. The question is, well, which one is it? They seem to be a little bit different from each other, and the times that we saw you say Shehecheyanu don't all seem to have both of those elements. So before we apply these principles to the different mitzvot, let's just look at which of these elements is more ikar to the recitation of Shehecheyanu. Which is the more foundational, fundamental element of this bracha of Shehecheyanu? We're going to see right now two Gemaras that are fascinating, I think, that kind of toy with this idea of what is the more fundamental element of this bracha of Shehecheyanu? Is it the simcha, or is it the mizman lizman? The Gemara is going to do something very unique, something that the Gemara does very rarely, and we're going to see the Gemara does that in two separate places, both about the bracha of Shehecheyanu. Look at the Gemara in source number 7. The Gemara Masechet Pesachim, Adab Kuf Aleph Amud Bet, is discussing a pidyon haben. Now, can we get a raise of hand in the room? Who has been to a pidyon haben in the past year? I actually was at 2 last year. That's because I was at Gruss with 30 other young couples living in Israel, and so a pidyon haben. Raise your hand if you've ever been to a pidyon haben. Okay, people have generally been to a pidyon haben, but not so recently. It's one of those things that comes up, mizman lizman, something that comes up once in a while. Now, the reason it comes up only once in a while is because what exactly is a pidyon haben? It only happens in very specific circumstances. It happens when you have a firstborn male of a family who's neither of the parents are either a Kohen or a Levi. It has to be the first pregnancy of the mother. It has to be a natural birth. And so with all of those elements, it really only comes up once in a while that we have a pidyon haben. What exactly happens at a pidyon haben is we, as if say that, it's as if the Kohen, you get a Kohen to come. I am a bat Kohen actually, so my father once in a while does pidyon habens, and so the Kohen comes, and we say, it's as if the Kohen owns this baby boy. And the Kohen turns to the father and says, which would you rather? Would you rather your son, or would you rather 5 silver coins? And the father says, hopefully, I would rather my son. And the father proceeds to pay the Kohen 5 silver coins. It's somewhere nowadays around the equivalent of $250, something like that. You could use 5 silver US dollars, people often use for a pidyon haben. Gives the Kohen those 5 silver dollars, and the Kohen says, okay, here's your son. He is now officially yours. Your son is now redeemed. That has been a pidyon haben. And the Gemara at the end of Masechet Pesachim says there are 2 brachot you say at a pidyon haben. There's a special bracha you say on a pidyon haben, Shehecheyanu al pidyon haben, and we also say at a pidyon haben this bracha of Shehecheyanu. Now the Gemara is going to ask a question. Let's see it in the Gemara's language. Let's start at in source number 7, the second line. Let's see. At the bracha of Shehecheyanu, the Gemara says, Baruch Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'hiyanu lazman hazeh. The bracha of Shehecheyanu at a pidyon haben, Kohen mevarich? Oh, avi haben mevarich. Who says this bracha at a pidyon haben? Is it the Kohen who says Shehecheyanu, or is it the father? And what the Gemara is about to do is really, I think, very clearly illustrate these 2 factors of mizman lazman and simcha. The Gemara says either Kohen mevarich, the Kohen should say the bracha of Shehecheyanu. Why? Dekamate hana'a liyadeh, because he is getting a hana'a. He's getting simcha. There's something joyous. The Kohen himself is benefiting from receiving those 5 silver coins. The Kohen has that simcha element of Shehecheyanu. So maybe he should be the one to say the bracha of Shehecheyanu on a pidyon haben. But the Gemara says, oh, or maybe avi haben mevarich. The father of the son should say the bracha. Why? Zika mitzvah, because he's doing a mitzvah that only comes up mizman lizman, a mitzvah that only comes up once in a while. What the Gemara is doing is it's separating these 2 factors. It's saying, what happens if when we have a mitzvah that has these 2 elements, simcha and mizman lizman, but the 2 elements are being experienced by 2 different people? Which one is more fundamental? Which one of those parties recites the bracha of Shehecheyanu? And what the Gemara does now is something that only comes up really once in a blue moon. Once in a while the Gemara does this. The Gemara says, Lo hava biyateh. The Gemara doesn't know. I don't know the answer. The Gemara eventually goes on to figure out the answer. But rarely does the Gemara do that, saying, Lo hava biyateh. I don't know. I don't know which element is more fundamental. Is it about simcha, Shehecheyanu, or is it about something that just comes up once in a while? And the Gemara does this again in another place. The Gemara in Masechet Eruvin, Daf Mem Amud Bet, in source number 8, is going to ask the question of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Do we say Shehecheyanu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or do we not say Shehecheyanu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? What's our practice nowadays? Do we say Shehecheyanu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? We do. Let's see if the Gemara gets to that. The Gemara asks, in the middle of the first line, Mahu lomar zman b'Rosh Hashanah with Yom Kippurim. Should we say zman? Should we say Shehecheyanu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? And the Gemara answers, well, I'm not sure. Ke'eman demizman lezman ate amrinan. Maybe we should say Shehecheyanu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because it only comes up once in a while. Only happens once a year that we have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. A mitzvah that happens sometimes. So we should say it. But on the other hand, O Dilma, Kevan lo ikri regalim lo amrinan. Maybe because they're not considered a regal. They're not one of the shalosh regalim. And the shalosh regalim are defined by simcha. There's a mitzvah of simchas yom tov, of happiness that we have on the holidays. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur aren't quite days of simcha. They're days of judgment. They're much more serious days. So because they're not a regal, they don't have this element of simcha, the Gemara says, perhaps we shouldn't say Shehecheyanu. So the Gemara, again, bringing us a case study where a mitzvah has one element, but not the other element. This is a mitzvah, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that happens mizman lizman. It only comes up sometimes. But on the other hand, They're very serious days. They're not necessarily days of simcha. And so again, what does the Gemara do? The Gemara says, do we say Shehecheyanu or not? Lo ha'aviyate. I don't know. Rare occurrence. The Gemara says it twice about Shehecheyanu. Clearly, the Gemara itself is a little bit unclear. It's a little bit confusing. When do we say this bracha? Do we say it on something that's happening, or do we say it on something that only happens once in a while? Question?
What's the difference between the Gemara saying Lo ha'aviyate and saying take it?
Great question. I think in the Lo ha'aviyate Gemaras, the Gemara often ends up finding the answer. Usually the first rabbi that they asked in the Gemara, the first Tana or Amora, didn't know the answer, and then the Gemara eventually finds the answer. In both of these cases, the Gemara eventually figured out an answer, and which we know. We in fact do say Shehecheyanu in Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, and who says the bracha of Shehecheyanu on Pidyon Haben? The father says the bracha of Shehecheyanu on Pidyon Haben. When the Gemara says Teku, the Gemara says, we're leaving this until Eliyahu Navi comes. The Gemara doesn't know what the answer is. So now we kind of saw all the times we say Shehecheyanu. We outlined those two rules for Shehecheyanu, and right now we're in the middle of trying to figure out, so which one is more fundamental? Which rule really is the governing principle of when we say this very meaningful bracha of Shehecheyanu? What we're going to do now is we're going to see a debate between the Rambam, Maimonides, and Tosfot, the Baalei HaTosfot. And this debate is both going to give two different approaches to how we can answer which of these elements is more fundamental, and the approach of Tosfot is going to lead us, I think, into some really beautiful and meaningful ideas about what the bracha of Shehecheyanu is trying to do, and just to give us some inspiration and meaning into our performance of mitzvot and our religious lives as a whole. We're going to see the Rambam, and we're going to see Tosfot, and then we're going to do a little bit of Chavrut at a time to really understand the application of Tosfot's principles. So let's start with the Rambam. The Rambam says, what the Rambam's going to do is he's going to say, we don't have to choose which element is more fundamental. The Rambam says, there are two distinct categories of when we say this bracha of Shehecheyanu. We say this bracha of Shehecheyanu on occurrences and events in life that bring us simcha, and as a separate category, we say this bracha of Shehecheyanu on mitzvot that we do once in a while. He's going to say, they don't have overlap. It's not that both elements have to apply. We just have two different categories of times we say Shehecheyanu. What the Rambam would have to answer then is, so why is it the same bracha? If it's two totally distinct categories, why do you say Shehecheyanu on both of them? Why is one not Shehecheyanu and one some other kind of bracha? But that's what the Rambam's going to do. Let's see the Rambam inside. The Rambam in source number 9, in Hilchot Brachot, I gave you a compilation of snippets from Parak Yud of Hilchot Brachot. The Rambam says, there are lots of brachot that we say that are praise and thanks for God. Right? For those who were here last time, we learned a Rambam that outlines 3 different types of brachot that we have. The Rambam categorizes all the brachot that we say into 3 different categories. Those brachot are 1, brachos hanehnin, bracha that we say on food, shahakol, mizono, a bracha that we have to say in order to be able to eat the food. We have brachot ha-mitzvah, says the Rambam, the bracha that we say before shaking the lulav, bracha that we say before eating matzah. And the 3rd category, and most perhaps expansive and interesting category of brachot, is brachos shevach v'avodah, brachot that are praise and thanks, that we say on natural phenomena. So here in this parak Yud, the 10th parak of Hilchot Brachot, the Rambam is talking about those brachot, the brachot shevach v'avodah, the kinds of brachot that we say upon seeing the Grand Canyon, or seeing a rainbow, or hearing a strong rumbling of thunder, those kind of brachot. And in the context of those brachot, the Rambam talks about bracha of Shehecheyanu. And he gives us a bunch of the lists that we saw from the Gemara. The Elohim, here are times we say the bracha of Shehecheyanu. Habonim bayis chadash, when you build a new house, vekolim kelim chadashim, and you buy new vessels, new clothing. And if you skip to the next line, we see the bracha of Shehecheyanu. You say, "V'kein haroa es chaveru la'achar shloshim yom," when you see your friend after 30 days. Yardu geshamim rabim, when a lot of rainfall happens and your crops are going to be plentiful. He says you should say Shehecheyanu there. All kinds of this worldly joys, this worldly pleasures and simplest. Things that happen in our life, that we buy a new house, we buy a car, there's a lot of rain and our crops are going to grow beautifully. Times in life that good material things happen, and the Rambam says that is category A of Shehecheyanu. The category of simcha, times when we are happy because we got some kind of material gain, something that makes us really happy. Now the Rambam is now going to say, we have though another category of Shehecheyanu. And the Rambam is very precise about how he organizes his halachot in Mishnah Torah. And what we notice here is that the Rambam is going to put these two different categories of Shehecheyanu in two different chapters of Hilchot Brachot. The chapter we just saw of Hilchot Brachot is Perek Yud. That's talking about the simcha, the joys, the material, this worldly kinds of pleasures. Now, in the next Perek Yud Aleph of Hilchot Brachot, the Rambam says in Halacha Tet, you can see source number 10, the other category, Kol mitzvah shehi mizman lizman, kagon shofar, v'sukkah, the lulav, the mikra megillah, the ner Chanukah. Those are also times you say Shehecheyanu. You see the Rambam uses this language of any mitzvah that comes, mizman lizman, a mitzvah that comes once in a while. And he goes on to list the mitzvot that we say Shehecheyanu on. Sukkah, shofar, lulav. So what the Rambam does is probably the most simple way to understand Shehecheyanu, is to say, it seems a little bit disparate, a little bit disjointed, all of these times we say Shehecheyanu. Well, I'll just organize it for you. There are two different categories of Shehecheyanu. One category they would say on simcha, on this worldly pleasures and good things that are material pleasures that happen in this world. And the other category is on things that happen mizman lizman, on mitzvot that happen once in a while. But Tosfot is going to say there's a different way we could see this bracha of Shehecheyanu. A different way we can organize it. Before we see Tosfot, there's just a beautiful story that is related a little bit to the Rambam and saying that the Rambam is saying that we take these material pleasures in life, and I think the idea the Rambam is trying to tell us is that sometimes we buy a new car, we buy a new house, and we think of those material gains as things that are a distinct sphere, that are separate from our going to shul on Shabbos and saying bracha. There are things that happen that I am so happy that I got a raise at my job, and that's not exactly tied to my avodas Hashem. That's not part of my service of God. And what the Rambam is saying is that we are meant to elevate those things to our service of God. We are meant to take the things that seem like this worldly pleasures, like there's a lot of rain and your crops are going to be very plentiful, and bring God into the picture. Say, when those things happen, we should say bracha of Shehecheyanu. And a very moving story that I heard that is about this similar theme is yet another. There are so many stories we could bring from what's going on in Israel now. A soldier who, Rachmana litzlan, came to Rav Asher Weiss and said, I lost in battle both of my legs and my right arm. And I have a number of halachic questions. He wanted to know, how should he do Netilat Yadayim with only one of his hands? How should he put on his tefillin shel yad when he only has his left arm now to wrap tefillin on? And his final bracha to Rav Asher Weiss was, hopefully the army is getting me prosthetic legs. I want to know, a question we touched on earlier, when do I say the Shehecheyanu? Do I say the Shehecheyanu when they fit me, when I get the prosthetics? Or do I say Shehecheyanu when I take those first steps, when I can walk again? And what's so powerful about this story is we see a soldier who has this very physical thing that happened to him. He's in the hospital, a very physical, this worldly kind of despair, and he's going to get something that's going to help him, that's going to bring him happiness. And he says, it's not only that I'm going to be able to walk again, I want to know, how can I bring God into the picture? When do I thank Hashem for being able to take those steps again? And I think that's a small point that the Rambam's trying to draw out here. How can I take this worldly things and elevate them by saying Shehecheyanu? Whatever halachic point of the Rambam is, we see these two categories for Shehecheyanu. What Tosfot now is going to do is say, I think we can merge these categories. Tosfot's going to say, every mitzvah is not only something that happens from time to time, but every mitzvah also has an element of simcha, that we say Shehecheyanu on it. and he's going to talk about how we should see this kind of joy in doing mitzvot. Let's see Tosfot inside in source number 11. The Tosfot in Masechet Sukkah asks, he says, "Sarah Lefarish Ta'am, we have to figure out the reason. Ma'ishna diyesh mitzvot shetiknu levarich Shehecheyanu, v'yesh mitzvot shelo tiknu." Why are there some mitzvot that we say Shehecheyanu on, but other mitzvot we don't say Shehecheyanu on? For example, b'asiyas sukkah v'lulav tiknu, we say Shehecheyanu on sukkah and lulav, u'b'asiyas tzitzis v'tefillin lo tiknu. But why don't we say it on tefillin and tzitzis? On making tefillin and tzitzis. And another one, he says, "V'kein apidyon haben mevarich Shehecheyanu, v'hilu amila lo mevarich." We say Shehecheyanu on apidyon haben, but we don't say it in bris milah. Now, those two seem very similar. Why do we say Shehecheyanu on apidyon haben, but not say it on a bris milah? And the foundational reason that Tosfot is going to give for why the discrepancy between these mitzvot is what he says in the bold in the second to last line. Tosfot tells us, "V'nira de mitzvah sheyesh alaya simcha tiknu Shehecheyanu." Tosfot merges these categories. He says, only a mitzvah that has real simcha to it, we say Shehecheyanu on. It's not that we say Shehecheyanu on simcha and on mitzvot. Tosfot says we say Shehecheyanu on mitzvot that also have simcha, or simcha that only happens once in a while. Both factors have to be present in order to say Shehecheyanu. And he proves this by bringing us a quote from the Mishnah that we saw in Masechet Brachot. This is Amrina B'Haroeh D'Mevarich Al Kelim Chadashim. He says, we know that simcha is a fundamental element to this bracha of Shehecheyanu because we see in the Mishnah Masechet Brachot that when you buy a new house or you buy new clothing, you say Shehecheyanu. What's so notable about the proof that Tosfot's bringing from that Mishnah is that Tosfot right now is talking about the category of saying Shehecheyanu on mitzvot. He's asking, why do we say Shehecheyanu on lulav and pidyon haben, but not on bris milah and not on tefillin and tzitzis? But he proves that we say the bracha of Shehecheyanu on mitzvot by bringing us a proof from the this-worldly kind of simchas. He brings us a proof from buying a house, from buying clothing. Clearly what Tosfot's trying to do is merge these categories and saying you only say Shehecheyanu on a mitzvah that also has an element of simcha. What we need to do now is see how this principle of Tosfot plays out. How does this exactly apply to mitzvot? So what we're going to do now is for, let's say, just 2 or 3 minutes. In Charusa, you can turn to the people next to you and we're going to read through the Avodah in source number 12. The Avodah is a commentary on the Siddur, on liturgy, on brachot, and he's going to apply Tosfot's principle to a number of mitzvot. If you turn the page on page 3, there are 3 guiding questions to look at. Focus on those questions when you're reading through this Avodah. Let's read through it for a few minutes, and then we're going to come together and see how he applies this principle, and then we'll try to wrap up this topic of Shehecheyanu with some nice hashkafa and some new meaning to the bracha. So let's all take a few minutes to work on the Avodah, and we'll gather back together in 2 or 3 minutes. What is the principle that the Avodah is trying to apply to all of these mitzvot? What element is the Avodah saying needs to be present in every mitzvah that warrants a Shehecheyanu? Joy. We have to have simcha. Every mitzvah that we say Shehecheyanu on must have simcha. Which examples did he give that you thought were reasonable, that made sense? That he plays out this simcha as part of the mitzvah, and it makes sense. That bracha, in fact, does seem to have elements of simcha.
Well, he said simcha and physical benefit.
Okay, right. We're going to add one other phrase. We have simcha and hana, happiness and pleasure, physical benefit. Which mitzvah made sense?
But no pain.
No pain. That would be
And
not simcha.
valid.
Yes. So which bracha which mitzvah did he say we should say Shehecheyanu on? Chanukah candles, because Hashem had mercy on us and redeemed us. Shofar, because Hashem is going to remember all of our good deeds and remember us for the good. Lulav, because the lulav has such a pleasurable scent. What else? now viable and is now a full-fledged child. And which brachot did he say we should not say Shehecheyanu on? A brit milah, because the child is in pain. How could we be so happy when the child is in pain? What else? B'tika chamit, because we feel a sense of sorrow having to sell or burn all of those expensive bottles of wine and all the chametz that we have in our homes. What's strange about the Vudraham? Which examples did you find to be a little bit of a stretch? Not so settled by those examples.
Kanani Omer we talked about, because there's a lot of things that we can't do because we don't have a Beit Mikdash.
So interesting. Why is Spirit Omer singled out as a mitzvah that we can't do without a Beit Mikdash? We also can't bring korbanot nowadays to the Beit Mikdash. We also can't do the Nisach HaMayim ceremony of the water libations that we do on Sukkot without, there are lots of things. Why specifically Spirit Omer?
Well, what he doesn't say is the basic idea of time.
Right. I think he's assuming that principle of time. These are all things that only happen once in a while.
So, korbanot would not be something that you do from time to time. It would be different from...
Good answer, because korbanot are something that we do more often than in those times. And we do tefillah in place of korbanot. We do tefillah every day. I think what's so interesting about this Avudraham is he's trying to say that mitzvot must have this element of simcha, or of hana, of a physical pleasure or joy that we're getting from doing mitzvot. And some of his examples, I think, are a bit of a stretch. To say that when you're shaking the lulav, you're so happy because it's this amazing aroma and scent that you get from the lulav, that the reason we're happy on Purim is because we remember that many years ago, God performed miracles and He saved us, that we're feeling overcome with a sense of joy when we blow the shofar, because blowing the shofar is going to go up to the heavens and God is going to remember us for the good. Those aren't usually the ways that we think about joy and pleasure, in that God performed miracles and He is going to remember us, and that it's so pleasurable because the lulav has this smell to it. Some of these examples seem to be a bit of a stretch of how he's trying to apply this principle of Tosfot, that there must be simcha present in every mitzvah that we say Shehecheyanu on. But I think what the Avudraham is trying to do is trying to tell us that these two categories of Shehecheyanu are not distinct. It's not, we shouldn't feel this bifurcation between this worldly joy and pleasure and spiritual joy and pleasure. I think that Avudraham is trying to say that when we do a mitzvah, we should feel a literal sense of joy and happiness. We should literally enjoy the scent of the lulav. We should feel overcome by happiness that God did miracles for us. He's saying that when we perform a mitzvah, we should say Shehecheyanu in order to bring out this element of pleasure and joy in our performance of mitzvah. And we'll see just two more sources that so clearly illustrate this principle. And that we saw last time, and we mentioned it, the Rambam that says there are three categories of mitzvah. There are berachos hanehinin, that we say on pleasure, on food. There are berachos mitzvot, we say on performing mitzvot. And there are berachos shevach v'hodah, that we say on praising and thanking God for things in the world. Which of those categories does Shehecheyanu fall under? The Rambam told us it falls under the bracha of the category of shevach v'hodah, on praise and thanks to God. And yet, if you look at source number 13, Rav Yaakov Endin, in his Sefer Gemara and Halacha, he says, we'll just look at the last line. He categorizes Shehecheyanu, unlike the Rambam. He is going to say the bracha of Shehecheyanu is a berachas hanehinin. It is a bracha we say upon pleasure. The equivalent of saying shahakal, the equivalent of saying ha'itz before biting into an apple, we must say Shehecheyanu before performing a mitzvah. He says in the last line, source number 13, Asur lahenos min ha'olam hazeh b'li bracha. It is forbidden for us to benefit from the pleasure of this world without saying a bracha. Kachu ikar dina shel bracha zo. And that is the nature of the bracha of Shehecheyanu. He takes this line that he says, that it's forbidden to benefit from the pleasure of this world without a bracha. He takes that straight out of the Gemara and bracha, talking about making a bracha on food. And he applies that to this bracha of Shehecheyanu that we say also on the performance of mitzvot. And when I saw this, I said, wow, he must be taking a radical approach and saying that the bracha of Shehecheyanu is categorically a bracha equivalent to the bracha of Borei Pri Ha'etz. He is saying that the bracha of Shehecheyanu is a berachas hanehenin. And I asked one of the Rosh Yeshiva of YU, Rav Sobolovsky, I saw him around shul, I said, oh, perfect, what do you think about him saying, can you really say that bracha of Shehecheyanu is the equivalent of Shehakol Ha'etz? He said, that's not what he's saying. It sounds like he's saying that this is a berachas hanehenin. It's not. Rav Yaakov Emden is just trying to teach us about the nature of Shehecheyanu. He's trying to say it's as if it's a berachas hanehenin. We should feel as if doing mitzvot is a berachas hanehenin, as if it is forbidden for us to perform this mitzvah. It is forbidden for us to get pleasure and joy out of doing this mitzvah until we first thank God for it. Until we first acknowledge that God is giving us this opportunity to do this mitzvah. This is so clearly illustrated. This will be the last source we see in the Chasam Sofer in source number 14. This Chasam Sofer, which is a halachic literature, this is a halachic response to work. And again, he brings this beautiful, meaningful idea. He says, Birchas Shehecheyanu, hu birchas hanehenin, this is a bracha upon pleasure, al Shehecheyanu Hashem la'asos mitzvah zo. The Chasam Sofer is saying the bracha of Shehecheyanu is thanking God, Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'hikiyanu lazman hazeh, showing gratitude towards God to bring us to this moment that we can perform this mitzvah. That we should feel overcome by gratitude and joy to God, that we have to almost ask God permission to do a mitzvah. To say, doing a mitzvah is this tremendously joyous occasion. It is this pleasurable experience. And I think we kind of see in the Rambam and Tosfot two different ideas, both beautiful ideas about the bracha of Shehecheyanu and what the nature of this bracha is. What the Rambam is doing is saying there are two categories of Shehecheyanu. There's Shehecheyanu we say on simcha, on pleasure, on hana'ah, and there's Shehecheyanu that we say on mitzvot that we do from time to time. And the lesson we can learn from the Rambam's category of simcha, of this worldly pleasures, is that we should not view this worldly pleasures as separate from our service of God. When we buy a new house, when we buy a new car, when something exciting happens in our lives, we shouldn't say, that's physical, that's monetary, that's materialistic, and this is my spiritual life. We should elevate those physical pleasures towards God. We should feel overcome by gratitude towards God when those things happen, and it should bring us to a place of reciting this bracha, Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'hikiyanu lazman hazeh. And what the Tosfot is doing is almost the flip side. Tosfot is almost de-elevating the spiritual. Tosfot is saying we shouldn't view the performance of mitzvot as something that's lofty and in the clouds and not connected to ourselves as people. Tosfot is saying when we do those lofty mitzvot, we should bring them down to earth. We should smell the lulav. We should feel the joy of performing a mitzvot. We should almost take that spiritual in the heavens kind of mitzvah and say, it brings us real joy. It brings us a tremendous pleasure to do mitzvah. We'll close with a bit of a sad but also very uplifting story about the bracha of Shehecheyanu. In Bergen-Belsen, it was the dead of the winter, and the Jews were in the midst of the Holocaust, and it came time for Chanukah. And there was a great Rebbe who was in that concentration camp, and he said, Chanukah is coming. We should prepare. We should find a way to bring the light of the Chanukah candles. And they took one of the inmates' clogs, his shoe, and that was their Chanukiah, and they gathered strands of thread from people's clothing, and they wove them into the wick for a candle for the first night of Chanukah. And he gathered together as many Jews as he can from the concentration camp around him on the first night of Chanukah. he lit the Chanukah candles, and he said the first bracha, L'hadlik ner shel Chanukah. And he said the second bracha, She'asa nisim lavotenu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. And then he paused, and he looked around, all the people standing around him, in the midst of the concentration camp. He thought about it, and he brought himself to say, Shehecheyanu v'kidmanu v'hiyanu lazman hazeh. And one of the other people at the camp came over to him afterwards and he said, how could you say the bracha of Shehecheyanu? How could you thank God for bringing us to this time? Is this what living is? Is this Shehecheyanu v'kidmanu? And he said, that's why I paused. When I looked around, and I saw the hundreds of Jews gathered together, even in the darkest times, for the performance of a mitzvah, and this mitzvah brought us back. It breathed new life into us. It gave people this mitzvah just a little bit of hope in these dark times. On that, I said the bracha of Shehecheyanu. And in the times that we're in now, in the place that Israel's in the world, even though we're in these dark times, as a nation, we have found those times to say Shehecheyanu. We saw the soldier who said it on the prosthetic leg, my aunt who said it upon all of her children being home, Rav Tarek who said it on his Talmidim coming back, whole and safe, back into the doors of the Yeshiva. And my bracha to everyone is both on a national level and in our own personal lives, that we should always be able to find those times of joy, those times that we are just overcome by a sense of gratitude towards God, that we'll be able to say with tremendous pleasure and kavana and concentration those very precious words. Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'hiyanu lazman hazeh. Thank you everyone for learning together. And for all who would like to stay a little bit at the end, we could do some practical Q&A on all of the halachic questions you're wondering why we don't say it at a wedding.